Hello and welcome to episode number 34, part two of JRocks Pop Culture Revolution. Tonight, once again, we're going to be celebrating 86 years of a movie, Pinocchio. This is what we're talking about here, folks. Wow, it's so hard to believe that this movie is that old, 86 years old. I mean, I don't know too many people who, at some point in their life, hasn't seen Pinocchio. I remember as a kid, always hearing my mom and dad saying, about trying to teach me about telling the truth. And hey, you got to tell the truth because if you don't tell the truth and you get caught in a lie, your nose is going to grow like Pinocchio. Of course, didn't want to be like Pinocchio and have a big nose. And it's one of the things I really remember kind of learning about, even to this day in my life. I take great pride in being a truthful person, honest person. Of course, we're all guilty of telling little white lies, but when it comes to the things that really matter in life, I take great pride in telling the truth. In fact, one thing that just kind of really irks me is, if somebody accuses me of not telling the truth, especially when I know I am telling the truth. Now let's get into why Pinocchio is such a special movie. Okay, I thought first what we do is, of course, get into some of the characters. Okay, now of course, Pinocchio is the star of the show. He's the main character. Now Pinocchio, of course, is he's a wooden puppet created by Geppetto, brought to life, of course, by the Blue Fairy. And the whole kind of concept or story behind Pinocchio is part of it. A big chunk of the story is um, what 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 Disney has been famous for all these years, making people believe in fantasy and believe in the fact that dreams can come true. You're going to see what I'm talking about, and one of the biggest aspects of the Pinocchio story is that is a Geppetto in the very beginning of the film. He wishes upon a star that his Pinocchio could turn into a real little boy. Um, Geppetto, I guess, always wanted to have a son. Never, for whatever reason, too. We don't get into Geppetto's the background of his life story or anything here, but one thing becomes really really obvious, and that he's this great wood maker. He makes things out of wood and stuff. And I guess he's always, like a lot of men, had a dream of being a father and having a son to, carry on his legacy. And so, very beginning of the movie, he wishes upon a star, basically that, I wish my Pinocchio could be a real little boy. And so, when the blue fairy comes and kind of hears Geppetto's wish at the beginning of the film, she talks to Pinocchio and says, "Okay, now Pinocchio, um, there's some things you're going to have to do to earn being a real boy. You got to be brave. You got to be truthful. You got to be unselfish to earn the reward of being a real little boy." And of course, Pinocchio is innocent in the beginning of the film. He's curious and he's easily influenced as we see throughout the film. Now, Jiminy Cricket, as I think I shared with you guys in part one of the episode, Jiminy Cricket was always one of my all-time favorite Disney characters. We kind of got into why, but I always love the fact of having a conscience. Um, even me, when I've had tough decisions in my own personal life to make, I've always kind of, everybody's kind of got a good side to them, bad side, and Jiminy Cricket kind of, brought that to life. It just really showed you what a conscience could look like. Not necessarily that everybody's conscience looks like a little green cricket or anything, but it shows you, it showed us, how people could struggle, kind of, good versus the bad side, or bad decision making. versus good decision making, and temptation. We all have temptations in our lives, and that's another big aspect of Pinocchio is all throughout the film. In order for Pinocchio to become a real little boy, which is the dream of Geppetto, and then eventually Pinocchio wishes, that's his dream too, but he wants to be a real little boy. But along the way, he's tempted. People come along and they throw temptation in his face, and he struggles with doing the right thing. And Jiminy Cricket is there all along the way to try to encourage him to do the right thing, of course. Now, a little more about Jiminy Cricket, because I found some more stuff about this, and it's very, very interesting. Of course, Jiminy Cricket, as I said, is Pinocchio's official conscience. And when the Blue Fairy comes along and she hears Geppetto's wish and she wants to grant it, she makes the conditions and says, okay, you got to be truthful, you got to be honest, you got to be unselfish, you got to stay out of trouble, got to be a good little boy, in order for you to become a real little boy. And so she meets Jiminy Cricket, and she kind of brands him be a fit Pinocchio's official conscience, and says, okay, well, you look after Pinocchio, and then you help him to do the right thing. And so the Blue Fairy is the one that gives Jiminy Cricket, of course, the job of being Pinocchio's conscience, and he takes to it. And he really, I think, is really fit into the job, if you know what I mean. He was a perfect candidate to be Pinocchio's conscience. I love the way Jiminy Cricket opens up the movie. Right at the beginning, starts narration throughout the entire movie. At the very beginning, and he sounds like the perfect little English gentleman, if you know what I mean. I mean, well mannered, well dressed for a cricket. I mean, I haven't seen too many crickets in real life that are really dressed like that can actually speak, but that's what made it so fun. That's another thing. First of all, this being a Disney film, being animation, there's certain liberties that we're allowed to take here. I mean, one of them is, okay, like I said, you're not going to see something like Jiminy Cricket in real life. You're not going to see a cricket that gets dressed like that can really talk and be somebody's conscience. But this is animation. This is a cartoon. This is Walt Disney animation, and so we're allowed to watch this movie, not question that we have a talking cricket for a wooden puppet's conscience who wants to be a real boy. You watch the movie, and the fact that none of that could really happen in real life, it doesn't even matter. We allow ourselves to be taken there. We allow ourselves the possibility of believing this is true. It's fantasy. It's like I said, it's wanting to believe that dreams really can come true. So we allow ourselves to be taken on this magical fantasy ride. We allow ourselves to be taken on this magical dream world, if you will, all throughout this film. Most people might question stuff like this, but not supposed to question it. We just go along, follow the story, and at the very end, we hope to God that Pinocchio becomes a real boy, and that we find out, dreams really do come true, and that's what made this such a beautiful movie. It's animated. As far as being something that could really happen, it doesn't matter. We want to believe that it could, We allow ourselves to go there. And that's one of the things I love the most about this film. Okay. So let's talk some more about Jiminy Cricket here. And so Jiminy Cricket, like I said, also becomes the narrator of the film. He's the advisor and the moral guide, the moral compass for Pinocchio all throughout the film. As Pinocchio is tempted along the way and getting in trouble, he's always there to do whatever he can to get Pinocchio back on the right path, if you will. And he tries to, like I said, keep Pinocchio out of trouble, but often struggles to do so because Pinocchio is always, almost always taken in by that awful temptation when it's dangled in his face, and Jiminy Cricket's there to kind of pull him back in to do the right thing. It's and Jiminy Cricket, as it turns out, 86 years later, remains one of Disney's most iconic characters. Let's be honest about that. And it's just this little tiny cricket now. But he's still got such a special place um, in the history of Disney to this day, and one of the most beloved Disney characters ever. Of course, then next we got to talk about Geppetto. Geppetto is a kind, elderly wood carver and a toy maker. He creates Pinocchio and loves him as if he were his own son. In fact, Geppetto starts to have dreams about, oh, how I wish Pinocchio was a real little boy. I mean, I think he creates Pinocchio almost because, like I said, like a lot of men maybe that didn't have a child. There are many men in life that one thing we almost all of us dream about is having a son, and especially somebody like Geppetto that's lonely and he makes all these things out of wood, but he doesn't have a wife. He has a cat and a fish, and Jiminy Cricket that lives in his wood shop with him. But he's all alone, and he creates this puppet. I think almost in the image of what he kind of envisioned his son would look like or be like, and he falls in love with the puppet to the point that he starts having these thoughts about, oh, how I wish my Pinocchio could be a real little boy. And that's at the very beginning of the film, the Blue Fairy hears this, and that becomes kind of from that point on, she really wants to make Geppetto's dream come true, but you know, Pinocchio is put out there. He's temptation is thrown in his face, and the Blue Fairy has to, kind of Pinocchio's got to earn it. In order for Geppetto's dream to come true, Pinocchio's got to be a good little boy, and so that's the whole basic crust of the film, and so it represents again. In regards to talking about Geppetto, this represents unconditional parental love. I mean, Pinocchio is not really his son; it's a puppet that he created. But again, it's what Geppetto always envisioned his child would look like or be like, and so he starts to fantasize, about what Pinocchio's voice would even sound like. Okay, and then we've been talking a little bit about the Blue Fairy. Okay, the Blue Fairy is a magical fairy who brings Pinocchio to life. By the end of the film, Pinocchio, he's had temptation thrown in his face. He's been tested along the way. Jiminy Cricket always kind of gets him back on the right path, and he never really did anything that was all that bad. He had some, and I think the big thing about the film is not so much. It's funny because I think when we all talk about seeing the movie Pinocchio, the Walt Disney one, of course, I'm talking about the original one from 1940. Most of the people talk about the fact that hey, don't tell a lie. You don't want your nose to grow like Pinocchio. That's kind of what most people take away. That it's about this puppet that told lies and his nose grew. But that was just kind of one small part of the film, and yet that's what most people remember about the film. To me, the film is more about dreams coming true, and again, Pinocchio is tested along the way, and although he's been tempted and he's told a few lies, he did a few things maybe he shouldn't have, but he never did anything that really hurt anybody else. He never did anything that was really all that bad. He was tested, he was tempted, but he got back on the right path, and he learned. He learned from his mistakes. I think that's another big aspect of the film Pinocchio is he told some lies. He got in some mischief, but he learned. He learned from his mistakes. That was the most important thing, I think, of all. And so, had Pinocchio not learned from past mistakes, had he continued to allow himself to be tempted and to continue to get in mischief to the point where he hurts himself or somebody else, maybe Geppetto's dream never would have come true. Maybe he never would have became a real boy. But this is, of course, Disney, and so that we're dealing in dreams and fantasy, and of course, by being a Pinocchio, we're gonna discover that dreams can come true. This is Walt Disney. This is what they do. This is what they are known for. Um, so there's that. And just like I told you guys in part one of episode 34 last week, just as we were wrapping up the episode, um, Walt Disney did not like the fact that when they first started production on Pinocchio, that originally some of the other artists and people working on the film, they stayed really true to the original Pinocchio from the 1800s, which was originally a much darker character. But as we discussed last week, Walt Disney actually halted production on Pinocchio, and he told them, no, we're I want people to see our movie Pinocchio. I want them to leave a theater loving Pinocchio, loving the character, loving who he is. This is too true. It's too true to the original version of Pinocchio. We want to Disney it up, if you will. We want people to like the character. The way it currently is, people see Pinocchio in his current state, where he's a lot darker of a character. He's more rude and crude, crass, loud, and just obnoxious almost. People aren't going to like the movie. They're not going to like the character. And I think Walt Disney was so right about that. Because again, you got to remember that Pinocchio is based on a story from the late 1800s. And by the time Walt Disney gets his hands on the story and they Disney it up and they turn a film into it, I mean, the guy that originally wrote Pinocchio, created the original character, the original story, he died at that point. He never lived to see his movie become the Disney classic that it is all these years later, 86 years later, after the film first came out. And so we got to keep that in mind, okay? And so I really think that's a big kind of part of why Pinocchio is so important, because it is animation. It allows us to go to believe in fairy tales and dreams coming true. That doesn't happen in everyday life, but we allow ourselves to be taken there, if you will. And of course, the blue fairy also symbolizes hope, wisdom, and moral judgment. Again, along the way, Pinocchio is tested, with what's right and wrong, to see if he knows what the right thing to do is. He's got Jiminy Cricket as his conscience. The blue fairy kind of gives him the rules to follow, and got to be a good little boy. Or if you want to become a real little boy, these are rules you got to follow. So make sure you follow them. So she sets them along that path. And like I said, Geppetto, this woodcarver, it's his dream. He has this dream of being a father, having this puppet he created in his vision of what he always envisioned his son would be like. He gives it a name, Pinocchio. And so Geppetto is very lonely. That's another reason he has a dream of having a son, but he doesn't have a wife. But we know we never see he has a girlfriend or anything like that. Of course, again, this is 1940, so maybe we assume that Geppetto was married and his wife died, because again, in the 1940s, this being Disney, we're not going to have Geppetto living in sin with a girlfriend or something like that. It just things were not like that. We're not seen in movies, especially Disney animation, if you will. And so instead of having a wife or a girlfriend or any of that, Geppetto has a cat, Figaro. He has a fish, Cleo. And so that's the little bit we know about Geppetto. Now, there were quite a few villains in Pinocchio, and this is where Pinocchio gets tempted along the way. There's Honest John and Worthington Fullfellow. A crafty fox, comes along, a con artist basically, um, tricking Pinocchio multiple times, uses charm and manipulation to tempt Pinocchio rather than force him to come along with them. Um, Often considers the film's primary uh, tempter. Again, but this is one of the main characters, Honest John, the fox, comes along and he asks Pinocchio, "You want some candy? You want to come along with us? We're gonna come with us. We're gonna show you how to have some real fun." Pinocchio is supposed to be going to school, but along the way he meets Honest John and some other people, and they start tempting him. And instead of going to school, eventually he never comes home that night when he was supposed to go to school. Geppetto starts to worry about him. They find out he never showed up for school. Oh my God. They worry something happened to him. Okay. This is the first sign of trouble, if you will, in the movie, that Pinocchio's not walking the straight and narrow. And so um, there's also Gideon the cat. Honest John's um, mule cat sidekick, clumsy and comedic, assist Honest John in his schemes. So Honest John is a little more intelligent. He's the main con man, if you will, but Gideon the cat kind of goes along as a sidekick, Stromboli, okay, this is another interesting character. Geppetto was, a wood carver. He created this puppet, Pinocchio. Well, Stromboli is a greedy traveling puppeteer. And he comes across Pinocchio and wants to use Pinocchio to make money. Stromboli, very greedy person. He wants to use Pinocchio to make money off of. He he's so that's what it says. Yeah. So Stromboli is a greedy traveling puppeteer. Sees Pinocchio as a money making attraction, imprisons him in a cage when Pinocchio wants to go home, represents exploitation and greed. So again, people 86 years later, they talk about Pinocchio and Stromboli and putting Pinocchio in a cage and locking him up. They say, hey, that's that's in a real not subtle way. That's kind of child trafficking, using children to make money off of, lock them up and imprisoning them. That's child trafficking. And again, 86 years ago in the movie comes out in 1940. I don't know that child trafficking as we know it today even really existed. And if it did, probably Walt Disney didn't really, I'm sure that was not his intent, that he wanted to show child trafficking in his film. But it's funny that I read 86 years later, 2026, as we celebrate the 86th anniversary of this film. People are saying, oh, that Stromboli, that kind of symbolizes child trafficking. I mean, it may be based on the way the world is today, but it's funny how people can kind of pick up on things that are taking place in the world today in a film that is 86 years old. I mean, it's just another interesting backdrop to this film. Now, Monstro is a gigantic sperm whale, swallows Geppetto, Figaro, Cleo, and later Pinocchio. Serves as the final obstacle in the story. It's more a force of nature than a traditional villain. And interestingly enough, what I also learned that in the original Pinocchio story, they did not have a whale, but they had rather a shark. I'm not sure why Walt Disney changed it to a whale, but I think for maybe Walt Disney's purposes, again, I think a shark could have maybe just as much been an obstacle from becoming a real little boy. But I guess, Walt Disney got creative and thought, well, if we have a whale kind of swallow Pinocchio and Geppetto and the fish and the cat, that's going to be an obstacle. How are we going to get out of the tummy of a whale? And that was an obstacle for a while, but they all work together, especially with the help of Jiminy Cricket. They eventually get out of a whale. And then, of course, by the time the film ends, Geppetto's dream does come true, and Pinocchio becomes a real little boy. Okay, now another big part of the temptation along the way, where you know Pinocchio meets these other characters like Strombolian and Gideon the Cat and Honest John. Um, he's taken to this place called Pleasure Island, and he encounters this other kid named Lampwick that is not really a great influence on Pinocchio. Um, Lampwick is a rebellious boy. He tempts Pinocchio to do things that are not right. He's saying, "Hey, man, let's you want to join me? Hey, let's smoke a cigar. Let's commit vandalism here. Let's just tear up the joint. Let's get drunk." And then Lampwick, right before Pinocchio's eyes, is turned into a donkey, a jackass, if you will. In fact, there's as he's turned into a donkey, before, which is, let's be honest, the equivalent of a jackass. Okay, right before Pinocchio's eyes, Pinocchio starts to have second. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I should put out the cigar. Maybe I shouldn't do these. Maybe I shouldn't be playing pool and getting drunk and vandalizing things. Look what happened to him. I don't. And then Pinocchio starts turning into a jackass, if you will. He starts to get a tail and donkey ears, and of course, this is just kind of a metaphor for showing kids and people that are watching Pinocchio that, hey, if you're taken in by temptation, you do bad things are going to happen to you. And so, right before his eyes, his Lampwick turns into a jackass, and Pinocchio starts to follow him. Pinocchio's like, "Oh no, I want to be a good boy." And Jiminy Cricket comes and saves him just in time, gets him out of there. And eventually, by the end of the film, Pinocchio is a real little boy. So, we have, of course, Jiminy Cricket to thank for that. And Pinocchio being smart enough, hey, I don't want to turn, I don't want to, I don't want to turn into a donkey like Lampwick. I want to do the right thing. I want to be a good boy. So Pinocchio apparently did have a conscience, and it did lead him to do the right thing. We're talking, of course, about conscience being Jiminy Cricket. Now, let's talk also about the song "When You Wish Upon a Star." Of course, that was such a big, that's the main song throughout the whole entire movie, and so let's talk about okay, it won the Academy Award um, that year for for the best song in the animated movie. Now, this is what I was able to kind of pick up on. It says at the 13th Academy Award held in 1941 for the films released in 1940, "When You Wish Upon a Star" won the Oscar for Best Original Song. Okay, it was the first Disney song ever to win an Academy Award. So that's one for the history books. That's something very important in talking about Walt Disney and the Disney company. The very first piece of music that won an Oscar award, an Academy Award, if you will, was "When You Wish Upon a Star." Song that talks about dreams really can come true, and man, so as far as what the Oscar meant for Disney, it validated Disney animation as serious filmmaking, not just merely for as children's entertainment, if you will. It demonstrated that animated films could produce music equal to that of live action Hollywood productions. It helped establish Disney's reputation for memorable songs and musical storytelling. It set a precedent, if you will, that would later lead to award-winning Disney songs from films such as, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, of course, Mulan, and many, many more over the years. But probably when we sit here and think about, I still think, and it's hard to believe that both the movie and the song are 86 years old. When You Wish Upon a Star, I mean, it would become one of the main theme songs for Disney over years, and it's very much an iconic piece of music. And another interesting note regarding When You Wish Upon a Star, again, it's about dreams coming true, believing that anything is possible. And in fact, one of my all-time favorite uh, rock singers, Gene Simmons, when he put out his 1978 Kiss solo album, the final track on that album was a great cover Gene does of When You Wish Upon a Star. And he's talked over the years, the reason he decided to cover the song was uh, uh, being an immigrant that originally, came here from Israel and, living the American dream, if you will. And he lived out many of his dreams. And that's why Gene said, I thought that was a perfect song for me to cover because I lived a lot of my dreams, and so the song was a perfect choice for Gene to end his 1978 solo album with. So that's kind of another little fun aspect here to the story. And again, in talking a little bit more about Pinocchio, it says that Geppetto's workshop contains dozens of intricate cuckoo clocks, many animated separately by Disney artists. Pinocchio was originally intended to be Disney's third feature after Bambi, but production difficulties on Bambi caused a schedule to change, and Pinocchio got moved up and became the second animated Disney movie following the success of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So we really got into learning about Pinocchio in episode 34 tonight, part two, celebrating 86 years of Pinocchio. Now, as I shared with you guys in part one, a great chunk of part one was talking about how World War II affected how Pinocchio performed in 1940 at the box office. And so go back and watch part one, and then be sure you watch tonight's episode where we really got into the fact that Pinocchio is all about dreams really can come true. And I think it's important for us all to allow ourselves to believe that, because the more you believe that dreams can come true, the more you'll have the opportunity to make your dreams come true. So you guys, I want to thank you once again for joining me, Jason JRocks Houston, and you've been watching episode number 34, part two of our Pinocchio special. As I said, we've been celebrating 86 years of Pinocchio. Oh man, I can't believe it. I can't believe the film is that old. But remember, tonight before you go to bed, maybe like Geppetto, wish upon a star, and you're going to find out that dreams can come true. I am Jason JRocks Houston, and you have been watching JRocks Pop Culture Revolution. And I want you all to remember, we are the loudest voice in pop culture. And that's why you want to tune into our show every Thursday morning at 8 a.m. on the Fire Rock TV network. Thanks again, folks. See you again real soon. Oh, and when we come to do this next week, we're going to have a real fun Happy Days themed episode that puts a spotlight on one of my all-time favorite TV characters. And of course, I'm talking about the Fonz. So tune in for that, and we'll see you again next week. Bye for now.